Let's take a closer look at TBLT in terms of its origins, principles, and benefits. The term task-based teaching was first introduced in the 1980s when TBLT emerged in response to some of the shortcomings of teaching practices at the time. Supporters of TBLT argued that language instruction was too teacher-centered, too focused on grammatical forms, and not giving learners enough opportunities to communicate in the target language. Today, task-based language teaching is being promoted in many countries around the globe as a potentially very powerful language pedagogy, claimed to stimulate the second language development of both children and adults. The principles of TBLT are rooted in views about how people learn foreign languages. Other language teaching methodologies see language as a complex system that has to be broken down into discrete pieces to make it manageable to learn. According to these perspectives, learners must master discrete pieces of language, such as vocabulary or grammar rules, before they're able to use them to communicate. TBLT offers a more holistic approach in which the language learner is directly confronted with the challenge to use language receptively, productively, for functional purposes and to integrate various sub-skills and different kinds of linguistic knowledge in task performance. Through TBLT, learners are encouraged to convey meaning with the linguistic tools that they have already developed, rather than being punished for forgetting grammar rules or vocabulary words. This learning method is designed to facilitate conversation, rather than restrict it. The dynamic of a language classroom can greatly influence students' capacity for learning. In classrooms where the teacher speaks the most often, they become responsible for controlling conversations, acting as the main source of knowledge, determining what is going to be taught, and exclusively providing input and stimulation for learners. You might call this the sage on the stage or teacher-centered approach. In contrast, TBLT is a learner-centered approach, where learners take part in selecting the content and linguistic tools used to communicate in the target language. Interaction between learners is encouraged throughout the learning process, not only at the end of the instructional unit. As Bygate, Norris, and Vandenbranden say, language use entails manipulating linguistic form to create interpersonal meaning. In language education, teachers are sometimes forced to choose between focusing on vocabulary and grammar or focusing on conversation. At one end of the spectrum, for example in audiolingualism, the instruction focuses on grammar over meaningful communication. The learners are expected to reach a good level of grammar accuracy before they are considered ready to communicate. At the other end of the language teaching spectrum, methodologies like total physical response or the natural approach emphasize meaningful communication between learners rather than linguistic forms. TBLT is a communication-centered and meaning-based approach. Communication is not merely the final outcome of a learning sequence, but instead takes place throughout all instruction and learning. At the same time, TBLT also recognizes the importance of grammar and encourages its teaching through meaningful activities. To sum up, TBLT is a holistic, learner-centered, and communication-based approach. Let's highlight some more benefits of TBLT. TBLT applies needs-based content selection as task-based course materials are designed with the needs of the learners in mind. Different language learners have different interests. For example, foreign service officers need specialized vocabulary for their work, conversing about cultural topics, conducting visa interviews, or dealing with local police. Custom-tailored materials for these kinds of real-world work situations provide opportunities for them to use the language in ways that they can easily relate to and see the need for. This has a positive effect on their motivation. Authentic materials, such as news articles or radio programs, expose learners to the language as it is used in daily life, providing relevant linguistic experience. TBLT emphasizes the use of authentic materials that were originally created for native speakers of the language, while discouraging the use of materials that were overly simplified for the language learner. Learners in task-based classrooms start using the language for communication in the beginning of the learning sequence. The need to learn specific grammar structures becomes apparent during initial interactions, which provides realistic context and demand for grammar. Communication throughout the learning sequence maximizes the time spent practicing the new language and promotes collaboration between learners. TBLT departs from the practice of memorizing dialogues that are potentially irrelevant to the learners. Instead, learners are asked to express their own personal experiences during communicative activities. This changes the learner's motivation to participate, as communicating true information about themselves makes learning more relevant, which in turn encourages learners to progress. TBLT allows you, the language teacher, to more easily personalize and motivate your classroom in a more authentic way.